Okay, wonderful. Hi, DLD community. We are so excited to have Alex with us today and learn about DLD and math. We've had a lot of parents send in questions, share concerns, and so this is going to be a fantastic learning opportunity. To start off, for any of you who don't know me, my name's Janine. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I'm one of the two founders of Empowered DLD. We also have Kamisha Russell, who is the other half of Empowered DLD. She will be interacting with those of you in the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to comment in the comment section and she will send those our way. And of course, the one I really want to introduce you to is Alex. She is a speech language pathologist. She's a graduate of Western University's combined master's and PhD program in speech language pathology. And I couldn't believe this when we were searching for experts. She actually lives in the town next to mine and works in the same town where I live. So that was a big shock. And it was just lovely to find out that we're so close together geographically. Alex's doctoral research focused on reading ability and brain connectivity, and she's especially interested in how reading, language, and math abilities overlap in the classroom, which is so important. During her PhD, Alex published a scoping review on math abilities in children with DLD, and she's really excited to share what she's learned through her research. She's going to discuss practical implications with us. We'll brainstorm ideas for supporting children with DLD in their academic learning, and I think it's just fantastic. And Alex is also a busy mom. She's got 4 kids between the ages of 2 and 5, so she knows what it's like to be balancing parenting and school and all the things. So, Alex, we're so glad to have you. Is there anything else you want to share about yourself before we jump into the topic?
No, I think you covered it all. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So, take it away.
All right, so I was thinking I would give kind of a brief overview of the paper that I published, which is focused more on kind of profiles of math ability in DLD, and then maybe we can jump into some of the questions that people submit in and have more of a conversation about how best to support kids with DLD. So when we think about DLD, we often think about those challenges in things like vocabulary, grammar, listening comprehension, explaining ideas, storytelling, and math does kind of seem like a separate subject. But as I'm sure a lot of you know, and the reason why you're here is because you know children with DLD who are struggling with math. So back in 2019 during my PhD, I published a scoping review paper on this topic, and I'm just going to go through it because I think it will provide some good context for our discussion today. So just to touch on what a scoping review is, this is a kind of qualitative research study where a researcher identifies and summarizes all of the existing scientific literature on a broad topic. So there isn't any kind of like statistical analysis done. It's looking at kind of a providing a summary of what the existing research says on a topic that's maybe just emerging or is kind of smaller. So in my scoping review, I was looking at all of the existing published papers. I should note this is back in 2019 and a little bit earlier when I actually wrote the paper that tested kids with DLD on any kind of math task. So with the goal of better understanding what kind of patterns of math abilities we were seeing emerging in kids with DLD. So essentially, I wanted to understand whether children with DLD are struggling with math itself or whether they're struggling, especially when math is presented through language. So I'll briefly go over a model of number processing that I think is kind of important to this. So this is the triple code model of number processing by a researcher named Stanislas Dehaene. So the idea of this model is that numerical tasks are supported by processing from 3 types of codes or types of like mental representations. So I forgot that I was going to be on Zoom and could probably have shared my screen here, but I made a little low
Mm.
tech one. Oh, except is it mirrored?
Nope, that's great. It's
Okay,
not.
you can see it. Okay, so there are 3 types of representations. There are verbal word representations. So if I say 6, that's your representation of the sound of the word 6 and knowing what kind of like word that corresponds to. Visual number, so this Arabic numeral of the number 6, and then magnitude. So here there are like 6 dots, that quantity of the number 6. And so any kind of numerical processing is thought to rely on these types of representations, and often making different like transitions between these types of representations.
Mhm.
So if we look at the body of research and math, research on math and DLD back in 2019, there were kind of a number of tasks that researchers tended to use to assess math abilities. So this would include number transcoding, so naming written numbers, so going from this written number to the verbal representation, or matching spoken and written numbers. This could also include counting. So this might look like counting from 1, or counting starting from a higher number, counting backwards, being given a bunch of objects and counting those objects. Arithmetic, so like recalling arithmetic facts or writing arithmetic problems. Things like number lines. So if you're given a number line with a given range, say there's a line that goes from 1 to 10, matching either a spoken number or a written digit onto where it would be placed on the number line. Magnitude comparison, so being given 2 digits or 2 arrays of dots, and identifying which one is larger or which one is smaller. Also word problems, so looking at an arithmetic problem that is presented in more of like an applied story format. And then kind of more generally, conceptual math tasks. These can vary quite widely, but just looking at like understanding of those underlying math principles, and often using objects instead of those symbols. So overall, looking at all the research that had been done at that point, the pattern showed that kids with DLD tended to have more trouble with tasks like counting, especially counting backwards, and especially counting on from a higher number. So this counting from 1 and up, especially with smaller numbers, is often kind of more rote learning, where they've kind of memorized the order, but counting on from a higher number or counting in a backwards order can be a little bit more tricky. Kids with DLD also tended to have difficulty with number transcoding, so moving between spoken number words and written digits. So for example, if you heard 47, then writing the digits for 47, or seeing the digits for 47 and naming it verbally as 47. They also tended to struggle more with arithmetic facts and math facts, especially when really quick fluent recall was needed. So like a quick test where they had to complete as many arithmetic facts as they could. And not surprisingly, they also struggled with those kind of word math problems, because those kind of word problems will require the child to understand the language of the problem before they can even get to doing the math part of it.
Right.
But the important part is that kids with DLD did perform similarly to their peers on tasks that had reduced language load. So this would be things like comparing quantities. So if you're given an array, 2 arrays of dots, and you're asked to name which one has more dots. This could be, they also perform similarly with using number lines. And also on conceptual tasks where the task was presented visually or with objects rather than just used through words. So this suggests that some kids may understand the math idea better when they can show that, better than they are able to show when the task is really language heavy. So this really suggests that these kids with DLD are struggling with math because of the language demands of the math tasks. There was actually a meta-analysis that was published this year. So meta-analysis is a statistical method where they take all those studies, sort of similar to what I did, but instead of just providing a like narrative summary of the research, they use statistics to look more precisely at like what the actual effect is. And so this meta-analysis that was actually just published in March looked at math abilities with DLD, and they found a really similar pattern of abilities to my scoping review. So that was nice to see, that kind of to back up those findings and provide some more really concrete statistical evidence that this is the case across basically all the research that exists on kids with DLD so far.
Yeah, that's very validating, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, overall, we know that kids with DLD, it may look like they don't get math, but really the issue is that that math is wrapped in so much language that it makes it hard for them to process and also hard for them to show their understanding. So um, they might be able to solve a problem when it's shown visually or when they have objects that they can use to show their understanding, but they might get lost in a word problem, or they might have trouble with those time facts where there's really quick retrieval of those verbal representations needed, when it's not really the understanding of those math concepts that's the problem.
Mhm. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to dive right into some questions, and some of them you might have already touched on, but we'll just see what we've got here. So, RuPaul sent in a question, and she was wondering how you feel about the current state of math instruction. She's saying she feels like the science of math is really behind the science of reading, and kids are learning algorithms and computation before truly understanding concepts. So, what are your thoughts, I guess, in general on the state of math instruction?
I feel like, I mean, it does obviously vary from place to place,
Hmm.
and this is a very international group, so the curriculums are very different. But I think in terms of, like, if I look at the science of reading, I think the science of reading, especially in recent years, has been really like clearly packaged for the public and is being communicated a lot more clearly to the general public. And the science of math is not so like nicely um translated into public knowledge. Um, but I don't think that means that there's no research evidence base for it.
Hmm.
So we do know that important parts of math instruction are things like explicit instruction, really like a structured explicit program, similar to what we know is best for reading instruction. We know that conceptual understanding is really important, that fluency is an important part of math as well. That using things like visual representations and manipulatives are an important part as well. And then also like kind of that instructional piece where we do that like guided practice, and then and moving towards like eventually reviewing the subjects. Like I think that consistent implementation piece is what is often missing.
Mm,
um so the problem with the like learning the algorithms is when they're taught as like things that we just need to memorize versus having enough meaning and language support and grounding with like visual and concrete representations to support the actual underlying conceptual understanding.
mm, yeah, so important. Thank you so much for explaining that so clearly. Our next question, you've covered part of it already, I think. Do you have anything to add on best methods or approaches to teach kids with DLD?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have a lot to to say in terms of this question, but I should acknowledge that unfortunately the research on the best ways to support kids with DLD and math is extremely limited.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, at the time of my scoping review back in 2019, there was only one single pilot study looking at math intervention for DLD.
Wow.
So I will touch on that a little bit, but to my knowledge, there have not been any other studies published since. So I will also note there were some commenters that asked about specific programs, and I'm really hesitant to recommend a specific program, partly because of this, there's not strong research evidence to support any one program, but also just as a speech language pathologist, I don't really feel like there's one single, like a one size fits all approach for any aspect of language or literacy or academic learning in general. So although as a parent, I really wish I could give you a specific program to implement. Every kid with DLD is different. And so it is partly a matter of kind of figuring out what works best for your child and what they're struggling with, so that you can support them in those areas. Um, But I will say from research on DLD more generally, and also research on kids who are struggling with math, but not necessarily related to DLD, we do have a good idea of what kinds of features are more likely to be helpful for kids with DLD, and also research on those strategies to help kids who are struggling in math more generally. So the first thing I would be looking for would be looking for approaches that make the math very visible and explicit and structured, and also really directly teach math vocabulary. So while I was kind of prepping for for today, I came across this government-run education evidence database from the US called What Works Clearinghouse. I can send the document on to Janine to share. But they publish practice guides for all kinds of different areas of education with evidence-based recommendations for educators, and they seem quite rigorous in kind of being very transparent about their process for reviewing and assessing research evidence, which I think is really important. But they do have a nice practice guide for assisting students struggling in math in elementary grades. I will note it does feel a little bit intimidating. It's 165 pages long, but the main practice guide portion is just the first third of that, and the other 100 pages are mostly details on like their process for reviewing and assessing research evidence. So if you feel like you have the mental bandwidth and time to go through that, I would really recommend it, because it does have some nice kind of strategies that are definitely applicable to kids with DLD, and it has a lot of examples as well. So based on this and what we know about instructional strategies for DLD in general, I would say the most important components are, like I mentioned, that explicit systematic instruction with really clear modeling, examples, guided practice, and then review of what they've learned. Those visual supports are going to be really, really, really important. I can't emphasize that more. So reducing the unnecessary language load as much as we can when teaching new math ideas. This doesn't mean that we need to remove language entirely. Kids still do need to learn that math vocabulary, but it means not only relying on verbal explanation. So this might mean we use things like objects or drawings or number lines, or visual models, or even gestures to show the idea, and then do it together, and then attach that language to something concrete to support that conceptual understanding, especially when we're introducing new math concepts.
Can I just in there for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
Really good. Can you give
Mhm.
some examples for parents who might not quite know what you mean by math vocabulary? Can you just give some
Yeah, so like the
ex-
words like difference or equal, or for older students like quotient, or even just the symbols like the percentage sign, the equal sign, the sign for a negative number.
Mhm.
So just being really explicit about teaching that vocabulary is also really important, and then using kind of visual support to support that teaching as well.
That's really good. And even would you
Mm-hmm.
say like showing them difference, that means subtraction, or altogether, that means like these kinds of things, that means addition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like pairing it with linking it to what they already know, and then using those visuals or concrete objects to support teaching of that vocabulary. I would say it's also really important to use really stable wording. So um, like really keep those key terms really consistent when those concepts are first being learned, and then you can start to kind of like expand the wording once the child understands the concept better.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We had lots of parents asking about word problems, but
Mm-hmm.
I think you might have had some more strategies that you want to add before we jump into
Yes,
that.
and one of them is a lot of stuff about word problems.
Because word
So
problems
yeah,
came up again and again and again.
it's
So we're gonna
a
get
whole
there,
beast.
everybody. Yeah,
Yeah.
but so much good stuff.
Yeah. Um, so also in terms of the visuals or manipulatives, I think it's an important piece is moving from really concrete manipulatives to abstract. Um, so starting with those physical manipulatives like blocks or um, marbles or kind of anything like that,
Mm.
and then moving towards more like semi-concrete representations, so drawings or visual cues,
Mhm.
and then moving towards symbols like those Arabic numerals or and kind of the more abstract math representations.
And Arabic numerals, she's just meaning like the actual written one.
Yeah, like the
I know
digits,
you
the
said that,
like
but
the number six. Yeah.
just in case
Yeah,
you
no,
didn't.
it's good to review.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, Another point that I would say is really important in math for DLD, but also just in the classroom in general, is being really flexible in how we assess learning. So maybe the child might point to something, might draw, might build with physical objects, might match things, might choose from like different options, or just demonstrate their knowledge in a way that isn't so language heavy. And maybe later we can help them build the words to explain their thinking, but we just can't assume that having not being able to explain themselves verbally means that they don't understand the concept.
That's so important. So important. So is that the type of thing you would suggest that parents ask for when they're advocating for their child with the teacher is, can you find other ways for my child to show what they know, such as drawing, pointing? These are specifics parents could ask for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an important accommodation, especially for assessment of learning. And I think, again, that doesn't just apply to math, it applies to every academic subject. It's not just English language where kids with DLD are going to have trouble academically, because all of classroom instruction is language based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. Um, The other thing I would say in terms of um, an important strategy is just to be cautious with making judgments about a child's math abilities when it's a speed-based task, because we know that if a child with DLD is slow with math facts, it might just be difficulty retrieving that verbal information quickly. And so that is absolutely something we can still work on, but we need to pair that with conceptual understanding and visual supports and strategies, not just pressure to be faster. Um,
Because sometimes they're just going to need a little bit more time. I know with my own son who is dyslexic, his teacher asked me, "Can you help him practice his like 2 plus 3, 1 plus 4?" And I thought, what on earth? And I realized, oh, he just needed 1 more second or 2 more seconds because she thought the automaticity needed to be there. So
mhm,
I love that you brought that up.
mhm. Yeah, and I don't think like math fluency is totally unimportant. Obviously, having that quick retrieval of those math facts is going to support fluency and ability to solve lots of other problems more quickly and accurately. But but yeah, I think we just need to be cautious about assuming that a child is really struggling with those math facts when really it just might be that, like you said, they just need another second or two to retrieve that verbal information.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll jump into word problems a little bit more because this is um, definitely
Yeah.
an area of focus when it comes to DLD and math. So the thing, obviously, with word problems is that it's a math task, but adding another, like either listening if the problem is spoken or reading comprehension component onto that, which can obviously be really tricky for kids with DLD. So I think historically strategies have been to identify keywords in these problems, but this can be a little bit risky because the keywords can mean different things depending on where they are in the sentence in the problem. So,
Mm.
for example, the word more often means to add. So, if you said like Mia has 3 more stickers than Ava, Ava has 8 stickers. How many stickers does Mia have? The child needs to add to solve that problem. But if you had a problem like Mia has 11 stickers, she has 3 more than Ava. How many stickers does Ava have? then the child actually needs to subtract to get the right answer. So if a child has learned that they need to look for the keyword more, and that means that they need to add, then they're going to have trouble on some questions
Mhm.
that use more in that different way. And that the same can apply to lots of different keywords. So more recently in math instruction, we've moved towards it's called a schema-based teaching of word problems. So basically teaching a schema is like a way of like organizing information so that you can figure out the patterns and kind of use that information to predict what might come next or what you need to do or things like that.
Mhm.
So the idea behind this approach is teaching students about different types of word problems so that they can recognize the structure of a word problem and then use this information to help them solve it. So thinking about reading the problem, what kind of situation is this? Is it a situation where we're combining things? So like adding things together? Is it
Mhm.
a situation where there are two amounts that are being compared? Is it something that is changing over time? Are there equal groups? Um, so if you teach the child how to recognize what kind of category this problem fits into, then that will support their ability to then solve the problem.
Mm.
Um, so I realize that all sounds quite vague and like hard to do specifically. But one of the programs that came up in some of the questions was Pirate Math. And I've been looking over it a little bit. Um, and it seems like a really good resource for schema-based teaching of word problems. That's what it's focused on.
Mm.
And there is a lot of really good quality evidence supporting its use in kids struggling in math. It has not been formally studied in kids with DLD yet, but the approach is really compelling for DLD because it targets that kind of language to math translation problem, which is exactly where kids with DLD are going to struggle. And it is free. So,
Oh, I didn't
um,
realize that. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So I think it's definitely worth checking out. I don't think it is good as like an entire math curriculum, particularly for the families here that are homeschooling,
Mhm.
because it is really focused specifically on those word problems. But I think for many kids with DLD who will struggle with those word problems, it could be a good resource for kind of that schema-based teaching where you're learning to read the problem, identify what the problem is about, decide kind of which specific category of problem it fits into, and then also kind of like use visual organizers to organize the quantities and parts of the problem and then to solve it.
I'm just going to jump in. So this particular
Mm-hmm.
program you're referring to is Pirate Math, right? That's schema
Mm-hmm.
based. Okay, we just had a
That's right. Yeah.
about that. And so Fariha, I hope that answered your question too. And Claudia, Andrea, Vicky, you were all asking about word problems. So I'm really excited to check out Pirate Math more. And I
Mm-hmm.
love your explanation, Alex, of the way that it can support kids with understanding word problems. That's fantastic. Hmm.
Yeah, thank you. There were also a few other programs that um, were asked about. So I can touch on those briefly. I will say I have not personally used any of these programs. And again, like I mentioned, there is not really any research evidence supporting their use with DLD. So
Hmm.
although it doesn't mean that they're not useful for DLD, it does mean that that I want to be cautious in recommending them, as I don't think there's like a one size fits all approach.
Hmm.
So maybe I will start with the one that there is a single study on in DLD. So it's called Right Start. Um, and there is one published study using this program in kindergartners with DLD specifically. It has been used with kind of other groups of children who are either um, developing kind of typical math abilities or are struggling with math more generally. But there is one study looking at applying it to kids with DLD. So the program focuses on understanding of concepts rather than just rote memorization. And it has a really big emphasis on visualization using manipulatives, particularly this like specialized abacus that they have kind of as part of the program. Um, and it does have that kind of movement from starting with concrete manipulatives to moving to something that's more like only semi-concrete, things like cards with dots or cards with tally marks to represent a quantity,
Mhm.
and then moving towards abstract, so those digits, the like written numbers. So in that pilot study, kids with DLD improved in their early math skills, both right after starting or right after completing the 6 month program, and then also maintained those gains a year later. Um, like I said, this is the only published study in kids with DLD, and it also only included 9 participants, which is a
Okay.
very small sample size um, for
Any study.
research in general. Yeah, any study. So I would consider this to be really promising early evidence, but not necessarily like proof that Right Start
Mhm.
is the best program for every kid. Um, I don't believe it is free, so that is also a consideration.
Right.
Um, a couple others that came up in the questions. One was Delta Math Response to Intervention, or RTI. So from what I've seen of this program, it looks like more of a like screening progress monitoring program that, and then with targeted intervention support based on kind of that screening progress monitoring results rather than like a whole math curriculum. So they do have really nice resources with a focus on visual manipulatives to support that concrete to semi-concrete to abstract kind of sequence.
Right.
And it could be really useful for identifying gaps in your child's knowledge and kind of monitoring their progress. The screening portion is paid, but the intervention resources are free. Um, so probably also worth taking a look at.
Hmm.
This could be also like if you've identified your own way without paying for this screening measure, areas that your child is struggling in, this could be kind of a nice way of like going through the resources and finding kind of which areas your child is struggling in and using those um, those supports as well. They have lots of like kind of worksheets and activities and things like that.
Mm, great, great. It's so good that there are some resources out there that are being developed, and I hope that we do get more research conducted so that we can have
Mm-hmm.
more compelling evidence. But it's great that results are looking promising. Those are
Mm-hmm.
results.
And especially that some of them are available for free because these
Yes.
can they can be really expensive.
Yes, I'm also dreaming of the day when parents don't have to do all this. Like, it's a lot for parents to go through all of this information and try to find the
Mm-hmm.
gaps. Like, I do hope in my heart that someday the systems will have changed so that it's not so much left to parents. But we've
Mm-hmm.
got a lot of really keen parents in here, or parents who decide maybe this year they can focus a little bit on math. And then maybe
Mm-hmm.
another year they're going to focus a little bit on something else. So I just want to encourage all the parents watching that we think the fact that you're even here watching this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It is a huge job. It's basically another full-time job trying to support your child. But I'm glad that there are at least some free resources out there, and I hope that as DLD becomes more well known, that there'll be more and more and more support, and that teachers will be more trained on this as well. But we're at the early stages, right, Alex?
Absolutely. And I think like just that awareness piece is really important, and not just awareness of DLD, but awareness of how it can impact the child in all areas of classroom instruction and everyday life and things like that, so that we can better support them.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Mhm.
So you mentioned progress monitoring a little bit. RuPaul had a specific question there on how to go about doing that to make sure kids have a strong conceptual understanding at elementary and middle school ages. Do you think that the Delta Math response to intervention would that apply here, or are there other suggestions you have?
I think so. I don't really have any specific um, like formal programs to suggest. I think something like Delta Math RTI can be really helpful for formally monitoring progress,
Hmm.
but I would emphasize that progress monitoring in kids with DLD would require a little bit more flexibility, especially if you want to capture that conceptual understanding, which I think is what the person who asked this question is asking about.
Hmm.
So I think what it you might want to start with a more formal progress monitoring measure, but then for areas of difficulty, more informally assess that conceptual understanding of the concepts that are trickier, um, in a way that is not so language heavy, and also in a way that is not timed. So, for example, looking at the kinds of questions that they have trouble with, and looking at then can they build this problem with blocks, can they draw it, can they place numbers on a number line, can they match an equation to like a story or a picture even would be really nice.
Hmm.
Or can they also solve different kinds of problems, or sorry, similar kinds of problems when they're presented slightly differently.
Mm.
um, so looking at not only can they solve the problem, but can they show it visually? Do they have that kind of conceptual understanding um, underlying their ability to solve the problem?
Mm.
So I don't think I have a super clear answer of like what program to use, because I think it does require a lot of flexibility on our parts as parents and educators and SLPs to kind of like figure out what works best for the child and how they specifically can show their language or their conceptual understanding.
Yeah, the approach really does need to be individualized, but I love that you gave some very specific examples of ways that we can see what type of progress they're making. That was really helpful. We've got another question here. What is the best way to fill gaps with a child who knows the math and gets best grades or good grades, but this doesn't come across in standardized testing? So I think she's referring specifically to making careless mistakes. Um, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think I would want to look at like what the pattern of errors is here. So are they tending to misread symbols or misinterpret a written question? Are they confused about certain math vocabulary? Is it just that they're having trouble holding like multi-step directions in working memory? Are they rushing because it's timed and they just don't have the time to go through it? Um, is it that they have a hard time with the like arithmetic fact retrieval, which makes the whole thing slower and harder for them? So that kind of adds to the time piece. So just kind of looking at the overall pattern of errors on one standardized test, or even multiple if you can look at them, to try to figure out where the like breakdown is happening.
Mhm.
Um, and then maybe we need to look at supports like extra time. That's a big and ideally easier to implement one, especially if the assessment is not specifically looking at speed. Then adding kind of extra time isn't kind of taking away of that assessment of the fluency piece.
Mhm.
Um, would it support the child better if they had the questions read aloud or simplified directions when this is allowed? I realize on standardized testing, again, that can be kind of a bigger ask and trickier to actually make happen. Um, is visual organization a problem for them? So, like, is graph paper going to help support them to like line up their work and keep things organized, reducing all the like visual clutter around them, things like that?
Mhm.
Um, would it be helpful for them to have like a vocabulary or formula or symbol reference sheet as kind of a support for that test?
Mhm.
Um, I like also in um, DLD and reading and I think this can really apply to math as well, is building a really explicit like metacognitive test taking routine. So like having a routine that you use for taking a test and then reviewing, and or like even initially like deciding which questions you're going to answer first and how you're going to attack that question. So really like explicitly practicing those steps for like, how am I going to attack this test, how am I going to attack this problem, and then also reviewing the work, so that we're going back and like have a really formal procedure for checking those mistakes and trying to catch them.
So if a parent wanted to do that with their child, would you suggest they ask the teacher for a test they'd already completed and then go back and sort of role play the process? Or what's the most practical way a parent can go through that process with their child or ask for a teacher to do that?
Mm-hmm. I think either, if I would hope that the teacher can speak to a little bit like where the kind of errors are happening, but looking at the test more directly as a parent might help you kind of like figure out what's going wrong. Also, especially if the child is a little bit older, like asking them what has been hard for them,
Hmm.
and like kind of better understanding their perspective as well,
Hmm.
um, so that we can understand, yeah, where that breakdown is happening, and where to best support them. um yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think too with the careless mistakes, sometimes anxiety, test anxiety is a component there too.
Mm-hmm.
So I love what you mentioned about empowering the child. If you're going through a test where they made mistakes, making sure that the way that you're going about it, of course, as we know as parents, is not to focus on you did this wrong or any type of shame, but to really
Mm-hmm.
say the reason that we're doing this is to set you up for success. Or wouldn't it feel great to go into a test knowing that you had a plan in place
Mm-hmm.
for what it is that you're going to do, how you're going to prioritize your time. Maybe you're going to take 2 minutes at the start to just get yourself calm and ready to go, that type of thing. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that you mentioned getting the kids involved and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging too that sometimes when we're really nervous, we do make careless mistakes, and that's okay. But if we have time at the end, part of our process of taking a test is to go back and just check over. Like you knew 2 plus 3 was 5, but you were hurrying or you were nervous and you wrote down 6 instead. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good idea that you mentioned. And I think it's something that parents can do in a sensitive way, and it could potentially make a huge difference for their child just to have a plan in place. Because sometimes we take it for granted, but prioritizing your time and deciding which questions to try first, like you said, that's actually requires a lot of higher level thinking skills to go
Mm-hmm.
about. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I think also that like kind of game plan approach to a test is something that can more easily be applied for standardized testing, where a lot of the other things that I mentioned might be a bigger ask and harder to get permission for.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're kind of training like a test taking routine where you, like you said, you go in, you sit down, you just breathe for 2 minutes, you like start reviewing the questions, kind of figuring out a game plan for where you're going to start and how you're going to review those questions. That's something that can be maybe initially implemented with something like a checklist, but ultimately can be implemented without that kind of thing, and a child can go into taking a standardized test without kind of any extra like formal written accommodations, to use that strategy.
Right. Okay, that's fantastic. Sarah was asking for tips to share, I mean, with the school or the teachers, specifically for math. So we've talked about a lot of them. If you could just say, in general, your top 3 tips,
Mm-hmm.
what would you tell Sarah to ask for her daughter?
I would say, can I give three for instruction and then a few for for assessment as well?
Definitely. Yeah, let's do
Okay,
it that
great.
way.
So I think for instruction, I would say like pre-teaching math vocabulary and using really those words really consistently and reviewing them
Mhm,
is a really important piece. I think also kind of that visual support, moving from like starting at really concrete with manipulatives, then
mhm,
moving towards semi-concrete with visuals before moving to more abstract.
mhm,
Um, and then um, I think also once they're at the age where they're moving to the word problems, teaching those word problem schemas really explicitly so that the child is learning what different types of word problems are and how they can categorize those,
mhm.
so that they can come up with kind of like their game plan to answer the problem.
And that's the one that you said Pirate Math, which is free,
Mm-hmm.
really good for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
Yeah. And then in terms of assessment, I think extra time can be really helpful. Um, but I think the biggest one is being a little bit more flexible in terms of letting the child show their understanding through drawings, through objects. Um, maybe it's easier for the child to say their answer than write it down. Just being really flexible and figuring out what works best for this child to show their conceptual understanding.
mhm.
Um, yeah.
Mm, That's so great because we want our kids to feel smart and we really want them to be able to show what they know. So I love that you brought that up. There are many different ways that you can show what you know, and one way isn't inherently better than the other way. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that can be really empowering for kids because we don't want them to feel like, oh, I suck at math or I'm not
Mm-hmm.
smart, I'm not good at this. So advocating for those things for your child can, I think, help them with their self-esteem and view themselves as more capable and competent and more open to learning new concepts instead of just feeling like bad about themselves, right? So
Mm-hmm.
setting your child up for success by sometimes, many times, asking for those accommodations can be really helpful.
Yeah.
We're just about
Sometimes, many times, you're right.
sometimes, many
Yeah.
times, yeah. It's not an easy journey for parents, but I think that it's going to get easier. It's going to get better as we continue to learn and grow. And DLD awareness is growing. So that is another positive thing. And I like to try to hold on to the positives because it can be so exhausting as a parent. And I just wanted to validate what everybody here is doing. It's a lot, but you are all amazing for helping your kids
Mm-hmm.
and learning and growing. So I think the last question that we have, because I'm mindful of time here. Oh, no, there's more than one. I'm going to do the other one first. So can we get a link to not only the, um, what was that, 167
Oh,
page?
the What Works Clearinghouse
Yes.
document.
So
Mm-hmm.
we'd love to get a link for that. The meta-analysis that you mentioned, some parents
Mm-hmm.
are keen to read that one as well. So if you can send us the link for those, we'll post them.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question is, what apps are out there for text to speech for children struggling in math who can't independently read worksheets, but they're capable of doing the math? And there seems to be an accessibility gap. So do you have any recommendations for apps or tools, specifically text to speech?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't have um, a ton of experience using text to speech. So I wonder if you have any recommendations also, Janine, or also if like the broader community, everybody listening, has any recommendations for what has worked for them. I did do a little bit of looking into it in terms of math specifically. So
Hmm.
I think it does depend a little bit on what system the school is already using. Like, are they using Microsoft? Are they using Google? Or yeah, like, do they have Chromebooks?
Hmm.
What device the child is using, and also whether the school has any access to these kind of programs already.
Hmm.
I did come across one called Equatio. It's spelled like equation, but with no N at the end.
Hmm.
And they have a screenshot reader tool that can capture like math problems, math like symbols,
Hmm.
and read them out loud. And so this seems like a good solution for reading more complex, like math problems where there might be symbols and things like that that a regular text to speech app might have more trouble with.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know if you have any experience with your students using text to speech, or if anybody else has any suggestions as well.
Yeah, I don't have specific recommendations, but I'm really interested
Mm-hmm.
in looking up that equatio that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. If anybody in the community has specific recommendations, please type that in the comments. That'll be really helpful for everybody who's tuning in here. And that pretty much is it for our questions. So, Alex, just before we go, is there any big takeaway message, or if there was one thing parents could remember? That's a very hard question to ask you because there's so many good things that you said. But if you have a specific takeaway message for parents, what would you say?
I think overall, just like that awareness that kids with DLD can have a really wonderful conceptual understanding of math, but just have trouble showing it because of the verbal demands of a lot of math assessment.
Hmm.
Just kind of that awareness piece and kind of thinking about it in terms of how does this like what kind of strategies work best for this child, not just in math, but a lot of this can apply to like every classroom um,
Every,
subject.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
so just kind of thinking about like what works best for your child specifically to support them with that, the verbal load of instruction and learning in the classroom, and how we can take that and apply that to math more specifically so that they can show what they do know. It's just that language piece is kind of getting in the way for them sometimes.
That is so great. That's just fantastic. And I love with older kids too, involving them in that conversation. Like we could try this strategy, we could try that strategy. Which one do you think works
Mm-hmm.
best for you? Because sometimes it's trial and error. So, Alex, I just
Mm-hmm.
want to thank you so much. This was very kind of you to use up nap time. Nap time is so precious, but use up nap time to come in and share your knowledge and expertise with our community. You've said so many helpful things. There's so many great tips and takeaways. So I'm just so grateful that you did this. And hopefully we can have you come on again sometime.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun to chat about this.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks so much. Bye bye, everybody.